Action.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Discovering Battles with Nate. I hope, and I would, before we get started, I'd like to actually point out that if I end up wearing, military helmets or hats and stuff, I mean no disrespect. They are meant to be symbols to honor the military, I assure you all very much. Well, with that said and done, this week's battle, or this episode's battle, will be about Diem Bien Phu. Now, I had just recently taken a military history class and actually had learned a little bit about this battle. And what intrigued me so much is how much of a big defeat this was for the French. Now, a little brief background, according to one of the documentaries that I actually have seen and two of the books that I will be citing for this episode, and also for having had taken the class that I just recently stated. Now, the French had ruled Indochina since around the late 1800s, or the mid to late 1800s. During World War II, though, the Japanese had ruled Indochina, but after World War II ended, the French took back over completely. What happened was the French were actually using crops that were made or harvested in Vietnam, like rice and rubber, just to name a few. And with these crops, meant money in France's pockets. However, the Vietnamese people wanted to be, have their own ways of doing things, just like any other country. Just like the Americans wanted during the American Revolution or the pre-revolution. What happened was eventually the Vietnamese wanted their independence, and they were using a guerrilla fighting force called the Viet Minh, who were for communism. They were formed to fight the French. However, North Vietnamese wanted to be ruled under communist power because Ho Chi Minh had recently gotten back from Russia, and Russia was a communist country at the time, and he was so fascinated and so used to the communist ways of being ruled, he figured it would be perfect for Vietnam. However, not everybody shared his opinion. And South Vietnam wanted to have their own ways, like democratic, republican ways of ruling Vietnam. But you'll probably learn more about that later if you're taking a Vietnam class or if you're reading books about, the history of Vietnam. But on March 13th through May 8th, 1954, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu took place. The French were under the command of Colonel Christian de Castres, and he commanded 16,000 French troops and Vietnamese who were loyal to France. And the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, and the Viet Minh, were under the command of General Vo Nguyen Giap, who had 50,000 troops under his command. Now, what happened was Dien Bien Phu was located near a Viet Minh supply line. And what happened was the French parachuted in there. They wanted to fortify Dien Bien Phu, and it had an abandoned airstrip that was built by the Japanese during World War II, but it was abandoned and never used because Japan was defeated. But back to the battle, or the background of the battle. What happened was they were in lower land, meaning they didn't have much for hills. That meant less hill cover in case of an enemy attack. And that was bad for the French. And the French wanted to also hold that area so that way if a fight was to come on, they were hoping they would be able to cut off the supply trails for the Viet Minh. Now, Dien Bien Phu was fortified by a couple of bunkers, and legend has it they were named after General Castres's mistresses. Some say that it was that, or it was just because they were female names that were started with the first letters of the alphabet. And they were Anna Marie, Beatrice, Gabrielle, Francoise, Higuete, also Claudia, and Isabel, and Elaine. Now, these were pretty much fortified bunkers that were used to try and, defend Diem Bien Phu. However, the Viet Minh had another idea up their sleeves. For the record, this marker here represents a trench and also tunnel system that was used by the Viet Minh. See, what happened was, the Viet Minh had civilians also help them disassemble 200 pieces of artillery, and then they would take a trail and carry them up these human hills, and then they would reassemble them, and that is how they were able to get, those weapons in place. And with these hills, they would have had upper ground, and they would be able to fire downhill or down towards Dien Bien Phu. But they had the perfect cover because of the hills. Not only that, with that, as I just recently stated, the airstrip was taken out during the battle by anti-aircraft fire. Now, with that taken out, no support planes could land. That means supplies couldn't have been delivered, neither could reinforcements, and there could have been no evacuation for the French to evacuate their wounded, or if they were overpowered, there was no way for them to escape. So, with that said, paratroopers and supplies had to be dropped in by parachute at ineligible altitudes. Now, when I say ineligible, meaning altitudes that would not have been safe for the paratroopers to jump at. That said and done, that would have made them able to be more vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire, and a lot of them would be dead or wounded before they even hit the ground, and that's pretty much, that means less reinforcements. Now, pretty much the tradition for the Legionnaire, or for the French Legionnaire, was to never surrender. You fight till the last bullet, or until the ammunition ran out, and you never surrendered. As I just recently stated, the Viet Minh were able to use tunnels and trenches. Now, with tunnels and trenches, the advantage to those is you're able to sneak your men or your platoon right in to where you want to go. And the ground is perfect cover. In this case, with the artillery, they were able to sneak close enough for the artillery units to be ineffected, or the guns to be ineffected, to take out and lessen the amount of men or the soldiers that the Viet Minh had. Now, Beatrice here was captured on March 13th, and it was used to destroy the command post. Now, with the command post, the commander was more than likely in there. With the commander pretty much assassinated or killed, then the French would have to go to the second in command. That did happen, but later on in the battle, when he saw that Dien Bien Phu was going to be overrun, and he didn't want to live with the humiliation of the defeat or be captured, he took a hand grenade, and he committed suicide with that. So now that Beatrice was captured, then that was used. By this time, the Viet Minh had about 62 miles of trenches dug in. Then Gabrielle was captured, and within 2 days after Beatrice being captured, and by the 17th of March, Anne Marie had been abandoned So it would have been easier for the Viet Minh to actually take that one, and then they would have more firepower to use against the French. The constant fire by artillery created more casualties, and that put more and more stress on the French because they were trying to tend to the wounded, and they could not just fight and tend to the wounded at the same time. And that caused a lot of stress. By March 30th, 1,000 defenders were cut off at Isabel. So pretty much them being cut off, they wouldn't have been able to defend or try to eliminate some of the Viet Minh that had actually captured these two, or pretty much these artillery units right here. By the end of April, Dominique, Elaine, and Higuete were the only ones left. So pretty much everything here had been overrun except for Elaine, but these were pretty much, captured. Now with that, these two units could fire upon these two here, and with this one, being cut off, it would have been ineffective for the French to be able to use. And so with Francois and Claudine, they were the only ones that were able to still be used. But the battle was over as of May 8th, 1954. The French had sustained 1,150 men killed, another 12,000 were captured, 5,000 of those men were wounded. And the Viet Minh had lost 8,000 men and 15,000 were wounded. The reason why this battle was so important was because with this battle, the French suffered a humiliating defeat. And this pretty much was the last straw. And the French decided they didn't want to stay in Vietnam or in Indochina anymore, and they decided that it was over. They've lost that battle, and that it was a humiliating defeat. Now my sources for this are going to be 100 Battles, which is Dien Bien Phu is actually mentioned in here, or talked about. It's one of the battles in there. Also, George C. Herring's America's Longest War, the United States and Vietnam, 1950 to 1975. And then I have the first episode of Battleground Vietnam, War in the Jungle. And the first episode is Into the Quagmire, 1954 to 1964. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Dien Bien Phu. I would like to thank you for watching, and I hope you all stay safe and stay healthy in considering these times. Have a nice day.